Welcome back to another episode of the Leaders of the Game podcast, where I sit down with senior execs from the world of sport and entertainment. In today's episode, I'm joined by a true powerhouse in the world of sports partnerships, strategy, and analytics, Armaan Ahluwalia. With a career spanning top global organizations like the Brooklyn Nets, Alpine F1, and the Kansas City Chiefs, Armaan has been instrumental in securing and optimizing over $250 million worth of partnerships. From leading the business insights team that helped land the largest NBA jersey patch deal in history to driving commercial innovation in Formula One, Armaan's expertise in data-driven decision-making, strategic deal-making, and partnership success measurement is second to none. Today, we'll dive into his journey, the evolving landscape of sports sponsorship, and what it takes to create high-impact partnerships in some of the most competitive leagues in the world. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe and keep up to date with all future episodes. Welcome to Leaders of the Game. How are you?
I'm doing well, James. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
No problem at all. I'm excited too. This should be a good one.
Yeah.
So let's dive straight into it, right? So we'll come on to you and your background, but I think first things first, you've worked across 3 different countries. So you'll have a perspective on different businesses, different cultures. Should we start there and include you, your background, and who you are?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll give, let's say, the Cliff Notes version. I don't want to bore your guests, your listener. Sorry. Yeah. So born and raised in Canada. Obviously, like to wear the Maple Leaf proud. Went to school on the east coast of Canada, and there I really found my passion for sports. And through writing for the university paper, when I didn't know that was an opportunity, and the business guy was definitely out of place with all the English majors, and I'm still not a great writer, but still love sports. And during that time, got to cover the basketball team at my university, and it led to doing some on-air coverage of the camera and the games and color commentating, which really, again, sparked my interest within sports. I had a professor at the time who talked about the Women's World Cup bid in 2015 coming to Canada. And in that moment, she said, yes, I was part of the bid. I did it. And that kind of just snapped for me. And I was like, I want to do that. I don't know what that is, but I want to do that. And so
you want to be involved some way.
Exactly. And so from that, I mean, it was Women's World Cup. It was Winnipeg, where I'm from in Canada. It was FIFA. It was sport. It was all these things combined into this kind of national pride that I have. And that's kind of was my North Star initially as I started to go, and came back to Winnipeg upon graduation, was doing some scouting for a basketball upstart company that has grown into something really big in Canada, which is also really cool. And ended up working for food and beverage. My family had restaurants, but the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were opening up their building. And so I got to work on basically a brand new stadium on the food and beverage side, where everything went wrong, like about as much as you can have, which really kind of set me up. And every kind of job that I've had along the way, from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in food and beverage, led to an opportunity in Kansas City from an internship on the actual luxury box side, which they appreciated the experience I had. And so yeah, I was very fortunate to have almost 6 years in Kansas City doing a number of different roles across my time with the Chiefs. Won a Super Bowl ring, which was really exciting with the team there. Got back to a second Super Bowl, but were not as successful, but very happy for my still colleagues there. They've had a couple more rings to their collection, which is very cool. And then moved to Brooklyn. Ended up, taking an opportunity to do something a little bit more global in a bigger city. That was something that was a little bit scary at the time. And from there, really wanted to see if I could push myself to a bigger area. We loved New York City. It was a great opportunity. Spent a lot of time really honing my creative skills when I was with the Brooklyn Nets. And again, getting more involved in women's sports with the New York Liberty, the WNBA team. And then from there, had an opportunity. A friend reached out who was kind of joining Alpine and Formula One. And so a little bit of background, I'm actually a dual citizen, Canadian and American, with a U.S. green card. My wife is American. So it's really provided a lot of opportunity for me to bounce around the 3 great countries. And so
Nice.
My grandfather grew up watching racing, and he had one of the dirt bike tracks in Manitoba that hosted the 1994 Canadian Championships. And so there's a picture of me at 3 or 4 years old, kind of handing trophies. And again, I wanted to get closer to my mom's side and really kind of learn and be part of what a global motorsport Formula One has become, and really a hot property. And so it was an opportunity to kind of do something different, be daring, and move to another country. So
you were destined to end up somehow in motorsport.
I think so, yeah. And I've always said that, I always wanted to live in the UK. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to push myself. I always think about what would make a better story? And that's kind of how I've thought about my career. And my sister said this to me one time where, I look back and I think, how did I, from a small town in Canada or a small city, make it to do all these great things? And my sister says, she's like, you always spoke it into existence. You were always just motivated and you kept saying, I'm going to work in the NFL. I'm going to work in the NFL. And then friends were like, you're going to move to a big city. You're going to move to a big city. And then you're going to work in motorsport. And so to answer your original question, I know I got off on a bit of a tangent there, so I apologize. Hopefully this wasn't too boring. But, there's so many unique differences that I found when working in the 3 different countries and live in, that although they all speak English, it's a very much a different type of English in all countries. There's so many nuances that you pick up on that you have to kind of tailor how you're speaking to different people and how you interact. I think is super important in the sense that, whereas I've said this to some friends, that Americans are very direct. They like to ask the point very head on. Whereas in the UK, they might talk around the issue because they don't want to necessarily have the confrontation, which is fine. It's just a different style. And so adapting those and really flexing those muscles has been a great experience for me in my career, to kind of almost become a chameleon in the sense of trying to develop new skills so that I can fit into any room that I walk in and really add value.
Amazing. And before we dive into the next question, just give the listeners a little bit of an overview of your speciality. What do you focus on across the roles that you've worked in?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate that I've had a variety of different roles, but really I would say the area that I focus in is this kind of meeting point of revenue and data. And so that kind of can take different shapes, different forms, whether that be commercial strategy, whether that be partnership analytics, whether it be strategy within revenue. And so those are really the areas of expertise of really where I focus on and had a lot of experience, whether that be working on naming rights or jersey patch or large scale partnerships. Really, I would say that on title, it would probably be partnership analytics or partnership strategy. But I like to think about it as I want to add value using data to really bring those conversations to look at something different, provide a different angle, and really be strategic in how we approach these problems and solving these big problems.
It's such a fascinating side of sport and entertainment. I can't wait to get into it. You've worked across major sports, NFL, NBA, now in Formula One. What have you seen? Have you seen differences in how partnerships are structured and valued across those 3 sports?
Yeah. And so, I'm assuming you guys have got a pretty international audience, but I'll kind of give a little bit of background on each. So in North America, a lot of time, the leagues have a lot of control. And what that does is that forces the teams to be a little bit different. You might say, okay, the NFL, that's such a big property. But I would argue, and this may be a controversial take, that NFL teams are really, really strong regional powerhouses. And what I mean by that is that there is a limitation of rights in what you can do within a certain region. So the Kansas City Chiefs, for example, they actually play in Missouri, not Kansas. But the NFL has a radius of about 75 miles where from that stadium, it expands out into certain states. So the Kansas City Chiefs, with their IP rights and their partnerships, can really only use their marks in Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. Had the stadium been like 10 miles more north, they'd also get Iowa. But that being said, they're really strong at doing regional partnerships. Now, people who are Chiefs fans will know that they've become a national brand. And so more national brands have entered the space. But those national brands that may have a headquarters in New York can't run a Chiefs ad or do anything on the ground there in New York because that is the local team's territory. So what that creates is a bit of a different functionality in how you have your offering. Basketball in the NBA is much more of a global sport and offers much more global recognition and a global audience, right? So a lot of the games are shown, I think it's like 200 plus countries across the NBA. So you're getting a much more focused global audience. Obviously, the NFL and American football is a harder sport to play just because of the cost, the number of people, whereas basketball is probably the next most easy sport outside of soccer or football to play easily. You need a hoop, you need basketball, you need a couple people. You don't even really need that many people. You can kind of just shoot by yourself if you wanted to. And so the NBA has similar rules to the NFL with how far you can promote things, but is a much more global property. Whereas Formula One is a completely different animal in the sense that you can really do anything anywhere. And so that was something that really excited me when I got here to say, we could go do a STEM program in Australia if we wanted to. Whereas in the NFL, you would never be able to do that kind of globalness and global scale. Obviously, things are changing. In Brooklyn, we had an opportunity to, and I just missed it, but we did the Nets in Paris, and we did a lot of activation there with the support of the NBA. And so it's things like that where Formula One is just very different and very global. And obviously, they don't necessarily, because they're a rotating track, you don't necessarily have those hardcore fans that are in that same location that you can talk to multiple times a year. It's just a little bit different. And so it creates unique challenges and opportunities, which is really special, and ability to kind of think creatively and differently.
Yeah, the evolution of Formula One over the last few years has been insane. And I think, like you said as well there, with the NFL coming to London a couple of times a year now as well, that's starting to pick up. And I'm sure the activation of partnerships and sponsorship deals that they tie in with the UK is growing. It's amazing that you've been in both worlds, and now you obviously see the world of Formula One. You've worked on, or you've played a key role in securing some high value deals. We'll go on reported figures. We won't go on the actual figures, and we don't need to go into them. The Nets jersey patch reported at around $90 million. The Chiefs naming right partnership. Give the listeners a little bit of an insight to that. Your approach, structuring of all of those deals. They're so transformational. It'd be great to get your take on those.
Yeah. And look, I'm one small piece of this huge thing that really is an organizational endeavor. Selfishly, when I was younger, I was like, I'm going to be this great person. I'm going to find the great insight. It's going to be all me. And then I realized it really takes a village to get this done, and the entire team to all moving in the right direction to make it super successful. So I would say that both Kansas City and Brooklyn, both the large scale partnerships, were a little bit different. So Kansas City plays in a historic stadium. It was, prior to GEHA Field, known as Arrowhead Stadium. It had been that for years since it was built in 1972. And so the Hunt family was very protective of having that rights change, given the way that Lamar Hunt, who is one of the greatest sports figures in terms of American history, but also global sports, and really cementing what we know as sports business today. And so within that was a little bit more of a challenge. We had hired an agency to help us with it. They had made some progress, but at the end of the day, it didn't work out. And so my former boss, and he currently runs the Miami F1 GP, Tyler Epp, basically came to me and said, we need to think differently. And so I love that problem solving kind of question. And so within that, I thought about it as, what can I do to kind of create some sort of data sets? Because right now it doesn't. There are not that many data points when you really look at naming rights. Again, even in Europe, there are very few far between. You have Emirates, you have the Etihad, but there's not that many. And so in North America, it was a little bit more of a commodity. And so I said, how can I create my own data set? And so I started basically thinking about, what can I use to create zeros and ones? And I'll speed along here in the story. But essentially what I did was I looked at all of the sponsors that had sponsored naming rights, where they were located from an HQ perspective as a distance to the actual arena. And then I also looked at revenues. And what I did was create this kind of formula that basically said 80% of the sponsorship deals at the time, I think back in 2016, almost all of them were within 50 miles from headquarters to stadium. So that gave us a little bit of an understanding of, okay, we need to start narrowing our search because it's going to come from our local partners. And so over time, we basically created this huge, pipeline of 1,000 companies down to 90. Then we ran it through our internal stakeholders and said, all right, who do you think? Do you know anyone of these places? We got it down to about 24. And then eventually we got one of them and brought them to the table. And so it was really cool to be part of that process, to build the relationships, work on being strategic about how we actually provide value to GEHA. And so it was an amazing experience. In Brooklyn, it was a little bit different. When I got there, they had already had a couple of iterations of jersey patches, one being Infor and then Motorola. And so they had actually had someone very close at the finish line. Unfortunately, it fell apart. And so we kind of had to jump into it. And so in that case, I played more of the proactiveness on it, but more of thinking about, right, we have this interested party. How do we show the data to actually make business sense for them, as this is a large investment for them in their business, and they've never done this before. And so in both instances, neither party had ever really got into sports sponsorship. So it was being strategic about education, showing them the facts and figures and saying, look, this is how we're going to transform your business. This is how we're going to make it work for you. And so that was an amazing process and something I will always cherish as a great experience to be a part of.
You're not blowing your own trumpet, but you are an unsung hero here, right? I think from a fan's perspective, we sit here and we hear it, we read about it in the news, we hear about it, about naming rights for stadiums across the Premier League, all the divisions, right? Across all different sports. And I think we just take it for granted. We think that's a massive organization that should be the stadium naming rights sponsor for X team because they're both huge. It's kind of like, no, there is so much data-driven decisions that need to be taken into consideration before anything is even brought to the table, let alone finalized. Amazing. So obviously, most recent role, like you said at the start, you wanted to come to the UK. Alpine came about. You lead commercial solutions and insights. The question that I've been dying to ask you really, well, there's a follow-up to this one, but what are the key trends shaping the future of sponsorships in motorsport, in your opinion?
So I'll maybe give you a different answer than maybe you might be anticipating. And what I would say is that there's two ways to look at it. There's the property and the team and the rights holder side, and then there's the brand side as well. Of course, there's agencies in the middle that are also very helpful as well too. But on the brand side, they are probably as sophisticated as it gets because they know the consumer. They have all of this information, all of this data, and by no means is every brand a wizard at this, but a lot of them really do know their consumer and they're really who they're trying to reach and how they want to reach them. I would also say that brands are probably 5 to 10 years ahead of rights holders in terms of business processes and different things. That may sound controversial, but that's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, right? And so I'm going to use a term, it has a little bit of violence, but a lot of times teams historically have brought spoons to a gunfight, right? And so you're clearly mismatched because a brand can sit, okay, I know exactly if I spend $1 on this campaign with Facebook or Instagram or on this, I know exactly how many dollars it's going to return me. On the team side, a lot of time historically, they have been saying, well, we kind of know how this works. And to be fair, we've come a long way, and I'll get into that in a minute. But it's really a lot of this partnership analytics development that over the last few years, whereas in 2015, 16, my boss came to me and said, we need to figure this out. This is coming. Partners are getting more and more curious about how their dollars are being spent, and budgets are getting harder, right? I'm sure you've probably heard this a lot in your line of work, James. Budgets are really tight. We have to be more efficient with our money. And this is the same for sponsorship in the world of commercial partnerships here in sports. And so within that, it's how are we developing new ways to ask the questions? How are we thinking about it strategically about what are your goals and what are your objectives and how are we measuring that, right? I would love to get to a world where every fan that we have, we can create a one-to-one experience where you are James, you show up and you like this at this event. And we've tailored a rewards program that really speaks to you and what's important to you. Whereas for me, you and I both are seen as both males, right? That like sports, but we have completely different personalities and what's interest to us. I always think about the example of King Charles and Ozzy Osbourne. They're both almost identical people from an age perspective. They're both wealthy. They're both males, but they're completely different spectrums. And so if you look at a data point and say, oh, great, all of the males like this or all the females want this, you're never going to really get to the true outcome of what you're wanting to do. And so over the years, we've really been starting to develop a lot of information around what campaigns are working, what campaigns are not, how we can start to drive impressions or engagements towards the actual outcome that a brand wants. And so that's the most important thing that really has seen a huge change, is being people more curious about it and asking those right questions. Because if you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to get the right answer or the right solution. And then again, it's going to be a waste of money, which then, unfortunately, hurts the brand from wanting to do sponsorship in the future.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer of, if it's working, let's do more of it. If it's not, let's change it and find a solution.
And this is an exact conversation I have with my clients from a rights holder's perspective, because in any sort of role, well, not any role, but in some roles, the client will say, we want someone that comes from another rights holder. And I challenge that straight away to think, well, why don't you look at someone that comes from a brand side? Because like you've just said, they know exactly their ROI. If they're spending $1, they know what they're getting back. It feels like sometimes, not all the time, I don't want to offend my clients, that In the rights holder side, it can be like a bit of an experiment. Like there is no real known outcome. It's kind of, we'll play with it and we'll see what we get. So actually taking somebody that's doing that elsewhere is not going to add real value to your business. You take someone externally from a brand side that gets it, you can have a real impact in the business.
And I would say that like a lot of times rights holders are afraid of what if it doesn't work. I think that's the wrong, maybe this is controversial. I don't know. I mean, I beat to a different drum, I guess, is how I've thought about my career. But like me, it's like, why not take the risk? Like if it doesn't work, and I've said this before, I actually want things to not work because it forces you to change. It forces you to adapt. It forces you to think differently. Because let's say it works really well and a moment goes viral. Everyone now thinks, and again, this is a broad paint stroke here, everyone thinks that, oh, this is the reason. We have to double down on that. How do you know you're going to get another viral moment? What were the things that made it work? Or if a team is really successful on field, that doesn't always, sometimes it can hide some of the cracks of what's actually happening. So historically in the NFL, the NBA, NHL, MLB, in North American sports, teams that do very poorly on field traditionally have very strong commercial departments in the sense that they have to be creative. They have to be innovative because they know that they're not going to get that influx or that advantage of the winning solves a lot of problems. And so I love that. Anyway, I could talk about for hours, but
no, it's true. No risk, no reward, right? Cool. So we've touched on technology, we've touched on innovation. In today's digital age, what would you say are the most valuable metrics that brands look for in a sports sponsorship?
I'm glad you asked that question. I think this one has a great opportunity to really, I'll say go off on a tangent, but really go down and really into it. And so I would say is that the short answer is it depends. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, what a terrible answer.
You've got to give us more.
Because really, at the end of the day, it is what is the objective, right? So I think back to GEHA, and their thing was brand awareness. And while that's not necessarily wrong, that is a very standard answer. We want people to know who our brand is. Okay, well, let me ask another question. Who do you care about most? Is it anyone? What if I give you impressions that really only reach your exact opposite target market? That's going to be wasted impressions, right? So thinking about what the objectives are and building metrics around that to measure it, I think is the most important thing that can possibly happen. And so what I mean by that, okay, if you tell me you really want to reach college educated males, 34 to 55, right? We want to develop content or a program that will reach and talk to them in the same way. But okay, so if it's just awareness, is it just serving them an ad? Sure, we can do that. But what if it's getting them to do something? How do we move them down the funnel if that's important to you, right? And so building in this sort of cadence of thinking about what the metrics are and how we measure them over time is one of the greatest opportunities that a brand has to do that. And so sometimes brands know exactly what they want and sometimes they don't. Or they do, you just have to ask them the right questions. And so sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit of a doctor doing a diagnosis when they come in to ask us better questions of, I've got this ailment or I've got this sort of thing. And you're like, okay, I can give you this to solve this. But is that actually the problem? Let's take a step back and figure out what might be causing that. And so one of the examples that I thought was really interesting was that one of the outcomes that I learned post GEHA was chatting with the CEO. And he said, this is going really well. I was having a conversation with a senior level candidate who had applied for the job. And I asked her, how did you hear about us? And the person said, oh, well, I saw that you guys did the sponsorship. So I looked you up and I saw you had some roles. And so the CEO said, it didn't work out with that one person. But what the actual effects of doing this partnership with you is that it led to more candidates applying for the job. And the talent pool started to increase, which was one of the things that we never even considered when doing this partnership, was that we wanted more talent influx into the business.
And that can be perceived as real brand awareness, true brand awareness.
Right. And what it did is it put a bit of that mind share into that person to think, right, GHA, should look them up. Oh, interesting. They have some roles. I should apply for this. And so what that does is that puts you on the map and it creates unique experiences for that. And so how do you measure that as a metric? people don't think about, oh, well, we could look at the job applications and see how many more applications are, whether that's actually driving it. Of course, there's the standard, how many impressions did we get? How much media value? And those are all what I like to say are kind of vanity metrics. They're important, of course. But if we can get more metrics and we can share in the data between the brand and us, I think we can really accomplish some amazing things. So again, I could talk about that for hours.
So it's about really digging into the client's wants at the end of it, and just keep honing in, keep asking questions. Don't stop until you've got a real good understanding of what the desired outcome is, and then you can run with it. And I think, like you said as well, it's the same in my world. A client will come to me, a profile of a candidate that they really want to hire. But then when you start asking questions around the roles, the responsibilities, the impact they're going to have on the business, you actually find out that it's a completely different profile to what they originally thought. So you just got to keep asking the questions. Totally get that. And I feel like the next question is one of my favorites for this podcast. But what's an overlooked or an underrated metric that you believe will gain more importance, let's say, in the next 5 years?
Yeah. So I think this is another one I'm very passionate about. So of course, we all know ROI, return on investment. It's very standard and it's very well used, but I think it can be better. So I envision something that we've kind of started to do a little bit here at Alpine is return on objective. Now, that basically, in my mind, one of the things I would love to do is basically create a metric. And it's very hard, but essentially thinking about what is your objective? Let's say it is brand awareness. We come back to this a few times. How do we think about what that is? Is it a number of impressions? Say your goal is 10 million impressions to this audience group or this location or whatever it is. And in theory, you'd have a dashboard that would kind of show you how that would track over time so that you could see, is the partnership working? Is it living up to the expectations? And so I think by thinking about it as return on objective rather than return on investment, it forces the brand and the team to be more focused on actually what is delivering. Now, sometimes in the industry, ROI can lead to, here's the media value. We generated 30 million impressions and $1,000 on this exposure. But what does that mean though? How does that media value actually translate? And a team may say, this is great. We really hit their objective. Okay, great. But how do we get more specific about that by thinking about those sorts of specific metrics, right? Like we talked about. Is hiring one of the things? They want to increase their talent pool. How do we create a metric for that to see if it is or isn't working? How do we associate this sort of partnership as to driving value back to the client? They want to move people further along the pipeline. How do we create opportunities to do that? How do we show them that by using their hospitality, for example, that creates a really great opportunity for you to create more business things? And how do you tie that to this business? Because they came to the race, we got 3 hours with them. That 3 hours, we built a relationship, we had a follow-up, and now they're spending millions of dollars with us, which we can associate to this. And so that's one of the real things that as an industry, we're going to have to continue to work on and share in data. We had this partnership with McDonald's and the Kansas City Chiefs. It was called Big Macs for Sacks. So for those that don't know, a sack is basically when you tackle the opposing quarterback behind the line of scrimmage in American football. It's a big play. And so for years and for years and for years, the McDonald's and Chiefs kept putting that out to the point where sometimes people would stop me and say, hey, has there been a sack in the game yet? I need to go to McDonald's. But I'm getting to the point. It worked so well, McDonald's wouldn't tell us how well it worked. The local operators were so afraid that because it worked so well for them, we were going to go back to them and charge them double or whatever the case may be. And so while that may be true over time, that if it is continuing to work and we're doing that, we would anticipate that it increase. But we wanted to know how well it works was to communicate a message to say, this can work. Here's tangible evidence. Now, we found through the grapevine that basically it increased store traffic by 5 to 10% on that day, which is a huge uplift for McDonald's. And we said, well, great, it's only 5 to 10%. How do we make it 10 to 15? How do we increase it to make it better? And so it's stuff like that where it's like working with your partners and sharing that data can be extremely beneficial as well.
But do you think brands will go into a partnership with that mentality? Is it not all about the investment, the money?
Of course. But return on objective figures out what that investment is, right? And it focuses on it a little more specifically. So I think you are 100% right. What are we getting back in doing this? But I would argue that using just media value is not the answer. It's part of a bigger, complex problem that needs to be more thought through over time that gets you a little bit focused. And you might say, look, we want to drive this many sales. Okay, great. So how does media value tie into that solution? It might not, right? It might be like, that's great. We have our sticker on the car. That's really good. But that hits an objective that is for our CEO, right? A CEO might be like, it's an ego play. Okay, how do we make the CEO happy? He wants to meet the drivers. He wants his car on that. And he wants to invite 10 of his best buddies out to one race every year to make him feel like he's $1 million. Okay, that's an objective. That's showing the value. Now, that will never show up on a balance sheet, but how do you justify that? Well, the objective was we really want this person to meet with key decision makers and feel like he's the most important person at the paddock. Okay.
And to me, that's a great approach because to me, that screams long-term partnership.
100%.
That doesn't scream we're doing it for a year, season, 2 years, 2 seasons, just to get an ROI. We're coming into this with a long-term play, and this is our objective, and this is what we want, and this is how we're going to work together over a period of time to get it. So I love that. Give us the most recent sponsorship activation that you think was exceptionally executed.
Yeah, so I'll give one of a more of a global and then one more local. So I think globally, I think the Paris Olympics, what LVMH did was fantastic, right? And I know that maybe some purist of the Olympics will say sponsorship doesn't belong at the Olympics. It was too much. I mean, even the Samsung Galaxy, selfie photo upon that, I thought that was fine. I thought that was a very cool moment to naturally integrate. But I love the subtlety of the premier LVMH products being integrated to carrying the medals, to trophies and things like that. I think that's fantastic. The other one I would say is that I've really been enjoying what Unrivaled, the women's 3-on-3 basketball tournament that's been taking up this year, which was a collaboration of 2 WNBA players. They've done some really interesting integrations. And why I say that is because they're looking at it as we want to improve and grow the game. Now, this is not a sponsorship, but this is a very interesting activation. Childcare is one of the things that is really important for WNBA players, right? As a female with kids, you have to sometimes prioritize your job over your kids. And so sometimes having someone to watch your children when you go to practice or the game is something that no one really thinks about. And so they've created this opportunity at their facility where there's childcare for them so that they feel like they can be their best, but then also still have importance for their family. And so different sponsorships through Ally and Sephora has been really great in what they're doing in that space. So I've definitely been keeping an eye on what Unrivaled has done.
Amazing. You've been involved in teams, as you mentioned earlier on, a collaborative approach, but you've led teams in your career today. So I want to get onto a little bit more on sort of the leadership side, insights to the listeners around leadership and what you take from it. So you've mentored teams across different organizations. What's your leadership philosophy when it comes to managing a high performing team?
Yeah. And by no means has it been super easy. I've learned a lot along the way, and I've made failures and I've learned from that, and I've tried to grow as well. So by no means this is a perfect answer.
I don't think any leader's had it smooth sailing throughout, right? You've got to learn, you've got to adapt.
Absolutely. And I think on that note you just mentioned, I think one thing that teams and properties don't necessarily do very well is provide people with the right training to be a leader, to be a manager, right? You're kind of just, hey, this is your team, go lead them and come back and tell me the problems and I'll help you. And it's like, whoa, like, how do I do this, right? And so I've been fortunate that I've had a lot of great mentors and people that have been there for me along the way. But I think about a lot of my management style has come from people that have been before. And one of the things that I think is really important is like, for me, it's really all about personal and professional development. I often start off with my job is to get the best out of you to help you achieve what's important to you. And quite frankly, it may be in 2 years, I want to take on this different role, or I want to be in this sport, or I want to be doing this. And I've always been very open about, great, how do I get you there? What can I do to help you? And so I'm very big on spending a lot of time with the person, learning them as an actual individual person, right? What makes them happy? What makes them tick? What do they do in their spare time? And learning about those and creating opportunities for them to thrive in that. But at the same time, also doing personal development, right? So one of the things I like to implement is that I kind of, every place I've gone or everywhere I've started, I always do a 90-day official check-in. So basically what I do is I basically tell the person, okay, in about 3-4 weeks, we're going to sit down and we're going to have an hour conversation where we're going to talk about how you're doing, right? And how we're tracking towards these goals for you. And I think that was really helpful for my time at Alpine, for my time at Brooklyn, for my time in Kansas City, when I managed people, for them to have a reset and an actual devoted time. Because of course, there are the yearly reviews and they are fine in the sense that there are standard HR questions that we have to talk about. And quite frankly, I've often found that that's not good enough, in that it's not enough time devoted to what are you struggling with? How can we get you to that next level? What sort of courses or conferences or things or people can I introduce you to help you expand your thinking, expand your skill set, and really develop? So I'm very much a servant leader is how I like to think about it, where I want to try to help them come the best that they can become. Now, is it perfect? No. Do I make mistakes? Of course, all the time. But I'm going to give everything I can to put them in the best position to succeed.
Love that. And what one piece of advice would you give to somebody maybe listening to this podcast or just starting to think about their career within sport and particularly within the world of commercial and insights? What's the advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I mean, I could go a number of different ways with this, right? It's always the what would you give to your younger self, right? I think I'll give two things. I know that's not how you asked the question, but I hope I'll be quick. So one, I think, is networking. Networking is such an important piece for a number of reasons. One, in this industry, in revenue and sponsorship, there's a lot of conversations that happen behind the glass, behind the doors that people don't know of. Oh, I hear this is happening, or what did you get for this number? And at least in North America, it's very open where a lot of people will exchange information, exchange ideas. Oh yeah, I've talked to them. I'm happy to make an introduction. So I think it's build those relationships because you never know where they're going to take you. And I've been fortunate in the last couple of jobs. I've never really had to look for a job. They've come to me and said, hey, like, would you be interested in this based on our relationship, based on what we know? I've always said it's really easy to build a relationship. It's really hard to maintain a relationship. And that's the part where people often forget is, oh, I know this person. Okay, when was the last time you talked to them? 10 years ago. Okay, so do you really know them? Like, what's happened, right?
A lot can happen in 10 years.
And then on the other side, I would say is like, be curious, right? Be open, be willing to read. Like, I read almost 4 to 5 different business journal article, daily newsletters every day because I want to know what's going on. The partnership world is actually really simple. And I think about it as R&D, replicate and duplicate. I'm sorry, recycle and duplicate, right? Everything that you've ever seen in partnership, very, very few of it is actually new and innovative. And so what you do is you basically say, okay, we could do this. Let's tweak it a little bit and make this perfect for the partner in our scenario. And so being inspired to be creative and break down doors and do new things, I think is super important.
Yeah, I echo everything you just said with that. I have loads of people approach me that see the space that I recruit into, and loads of people want to work in it. And young guys come out of university, college, and they want to break into this industry. They say to me, well, "What do I need to do?" And the first thing I say is network. Get to know people within the industry. Ask questions. Continue to just say why, how, like all these sort of questions. But I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's maintaining that relationship after you've built it is crucial. And then obviously being curious. It goes back to the question that I asked you around, what's going to develop in the next 4 to 5 years. You don't just come up with that. You come up with that answer through reading, having your finger on the pulse, knowing what businesses are doing, knowing what businesses want to do but aren't doing yet because they don't know how to do it. It's crucial. What's the most proudest moment of your career so far? Before we come on to a quick fire.
Man, I would say that, of course, naming rights was amazing. But really, what's the most proud moment is seeing the people that I have managed succeed. Like, hands away, the first intern I ever hired with my decision in Kansas City, I still follow up on how her success is, and it makes me super proud to know that she's done super well and like had a really successful career. And some of the people that I taught how to sell when I had really never sold myself, to see them be so successful and really doing deals in their own way and moving and succeeding. Yeah, that's definitely the proudest moment.
Amazing. Quick fire to end it. What's your favorite sports moment that you've ever seen live?
That one's tough. I was thinking about this a little bit earlier today, and I would say, look, the Kansas City Chiefs winning the Super Bowl in Miami.
I was going to say,
Was
you
an
mentioned it
amazing,
earlier.
was an amazing,
If that's not even mentioned here.
was an amazing moment. What was really cool is being on the field in the AFC Championship game. They let the staff on the field for the champion. This is again like 4 months before COVID happens, and seeing people who have been at the team for 30 years and had never sniffed this close, just seeing them made me so happy. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Seeing even the person in accounting that had been there for 30 years and just basically almost like crying on the field, right? Of just like, oh my goodness, we're going to the Super Bowl. I still get goosebumps about it today. Yeah.
You've mentioned on this podcast some really amazing brands and rights holders that you've represented. Dream brand to bring in on a sponsorship partnership?
Yeah, I would say probably Apple, just because they're just so hard. And I know they have the MLS thing, and that's great, but for so long they've said no to so many people because they're such a great blue chip brand, and really, properties and rights probably need it more than they need anything. And so I think that would be very cool to be able to do something like that.
One book, podcast, consistent article that you read that's influenced your approach to business?
Yeah, I would say Good to Great is an amazing book. I think about that a lot when building teams, of getting the right people on the bus, figuring out where they sit, and then letting them drive the bus. And I often think about that a lot. So,
a term we use a lot where we are. Good to great.
Yeah.
This might be a tricky one. F1, NBA, or NFL? You have to work in one of those sports for the rest of your life. Which one are you choosing?
Oh my goodness, that is tough. I'm sure this is going to come back to haunt me in a later life. I would probably say the NFL. I really love American football. Not that I don't love basketball or from motorsport, but I've really enjoyed the relationships in the NFL, and kind of being the game every Sunday was a really cool, special opportunity to 70,000 people go crazy almost every weekend. So yeah, the NFL would be slightly ahead.
Amazing. And what's next for you? Any big ambitions, projects you're excited about?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just continuing to learn and add things, right? I've been really focused on kind of doing the best that I can here at Alpine, and I'm excited to keep kind of pushing forward. I'm speaking at a conference about metrics and data, which is, again, obviously very exciting for me, and I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, I mean, hopefully more new partnerships and more exciting news would be a great way to end that question.
Great. Armaan, it's been amazing to have you on. Really insightful answers to those questions. It's such a fascinating world that you work in, brings so much ROI. So I think there's so many takeaways for the listeners here from a leadership perspective, from your day in, day out work. It's been great to have you on board. Good luck for everything in the future. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And again, just seeing how far we've come in the data world and how much further we're going to go, I'm super excited to be on this journey as well. So thank you so much.
No worries at all. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.